Right, this is from the late show. The late Tony Blair, who will go down in history as a homicidal maniac. I see that they've done his face up. This is a good makeover. Once we've seen, actually, without this makeover, once you've seen this fella without this makeup, boy, oh boy, does he look piggy evil. Oh, the devil incarnate. I'd just like to say something here from first-hand experience, which will not come out in this so-called Chilcot report, that Tony Blair deliberately, with malice aforethought, went into that war. He showed in the first instance rather, that there is no such thing in the UK as a democracy. That's always been a fallacy. Democracy is simply a word that the politicians use to make the sheeple, the general public as a whole, feel that they have a say in government. Now, there are certain things that government does obey when the people say to the government, this is wrong. And they only obey it because they decide, and it is they who decide, if it is correct or not. There are times when the government is pushed to the wall and they have to obey the people. And it gets them totally, utterly irate. Because the UK is run autocratically, not democratically. In the 80s we had the poll tax riots. The government sought, under Maggie Thatcher, to quell the riots. But the more they sought to quell the riots, the more the riots went on. Pardon me. And in the end, we that were involved, yes, we that were involved, in protesting against the government, beat the government of the day. And Thatcher lost her role as the Prime Minister, eventually. Her ratings went down the pig in tubes, so they had to get shut of her. Now, we only beat them because they couldn't get enough courts open, and they couldn't afford to open enough courts to prosecute us. So they called it a day. They called it a day. They had to. They didn't want to. Oh no, we were too strong. We held together over the issue and we won. And pardon me. So they had to back down. Now this boy here, alright, he showed again that the Constitution of the UK is as it was written down and confirmed in 1911, Parliamentary Act, that the country is to be run on autocratic lines. The government decides what the people should do and obey. You see, in a democracy, in the Greek, it means to have the hands around the throat of the government, to order the government to do this, that and the other. But it's turned, you see, in an autocratic system, the government has its hands around the throats of the people. And if the people do not like what the government proclaims, then there are penalties, fines, prison. No longer can the British government deport people to the likes of Australia. No, they just imprisoned them. Now, coming back to this, fiend, an utter fiend. One of the things that will not be in the Chilcot report, I've not read it, but I can actually say it will not be in, because this man wouldn't be sitting here, he'd be prosecuted. Utterly prosecuted. But they look to watch each other's backs in high office. Now, just about a year before the actual war began, and the voice of the people was ignored, this brat of hell had decided to go to war with Saddam Hussein. Now, I sat and I saw a clip on a TV somewhere of this fiend standing with George Bush in the UN, claiming that they needed a mandate from the UN to go to war with Saddam Hussein. Now, the UN cannot give that mandate. There is no mandate in the UN to declare war upon another nation. And yet they created one, just for this purpose. And I'll come down to this. He stood with George Bush and he said that they need not have to go to war with Saddam Hussein if he revealed his weapons of mass destruction. Now, when I saw that, I thought, you pigging hypocrite, you fiend, you bastard. Because down the road from me, these cheeky beggars, government, MOD, him at the head of it, were loading ships full of munitions and men, tanks, armaments of one sort or another to be shipped abroad. I believe it was to Turkey at the time. And they were doing it secretly. The British government does not expend millions upon millions and upon millions shipping weapons of mass destruction if it's not going to use them. And this bugger here is standing in the UN saying, oh, we might not have to go to war with Saddam Hussein. He'd already settled the fact. He was lying to us. He knew there was no weapons of mass destruction. The only weapons of mass destruction there were on the side of the US and the British government for two countries. Without the rest, they brought their weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein. And when Dr. David Kelly stood up and he said there's no weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein has, that was a stumbling block. Before Dr. David Kelly stood up, he was fit, he was well, no problems. But once he stood up and was a barrier in the way of these buggers taking those weapons of mass destruction that they'd already shipped out and were continuing to ship out, they had to get rid of him. All of a sudden, he was suicidal, shot himself. How convenient. The obstacle was shifted. And you know something? There were Chinook helicopters, alright, ferrying all the equipment and men down to a place called Marchwood, just up the road from where I lived. And they were doing it over the New Forest, at the back of the New Forest, where there was very little residents. They wouldn't go over Totton, which was the quickest way into Marchwood, because Totton was heavily populated, is heavily populated, and the Marchwood bypass is full of vehicles. They'd have seen these things hanging from below the Chinook helicopters, and they would have concluded that one, as it were, well, makes 11, but 2 in this world. And then they said, right, this boy is going to war, even though he says he's not going to war. They did it craftily. He knew what he was about. This guy knew exactly what he was about. And they snuck the stuff in. And eventually, some months on, Greenpeace turned up. They'd heard what was going on. They turned up and they were blasted. Water cannon, heavy water cannon from the ships. Blasted them in the Solent. Boy, oh boy, was the game up. The game was up, but it was all smoothed over. Yes, this guy knew what he was doing. There was no way, as again, that the British government is going to spend all that amount of money secretly shipping stuff abroad, their weapons of mass destruction, against another sovereign country. This man should be tried and imprisoned for the rest of his life. But he won't. And the Chilcot report will not emphasise that this was skullduggery, that Tony Blair ordered all the weapons of mass destruction from this country over to another country, whilst he stood up and he said, we may not go to war. That's skullduggery. That's what this fiend does, and that is not what will be featured in the Chilcot report. Blair had made up his mind from the very outset with George Bush to take on Saddam Hussein. When it comes to weapons of mass destruction, of course there was none found, and Tony Blair and George Bush knew there was no weapons of mass destruction. They also knew, which probably may not come through the Chilcot report, that Saddam Hussein had no delivery weapons. So he couldn't have hit the UK in 4 minutes. He had no delivery system to deliver these non-existent weapons of mass destruction. So he was a threat to nobody. He wasn't a threat to the UK. He wasn't a threat to France, Italy, the US, anyone. Then they come back and they say, he attacked his people, he gassed his people, blah, 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 blah. And they tried this as a smokescreen. Okay? And a diversion. Fine, okay, you say that. Alright? You tell me something. Okay? If you're going on that premise, why haven't you taken your weapons of mass destruction, British government and US government, against Turkey? Because Turkey gassed the Kurds. And what Kurds that were left fled, leaving their houses behind, and the Turkish government gave the houses to their people. Why didn't you take your weapons of mass destruction in the 70s to defend Cyprus when the Turks invaded Cyprus? Why not? Why is it British government and the US government, particularly the UK government, that you support a terrorist organisation called Turkey, gassing the Kurds, invading Cyprus? Why don't you deal with them? Huh? If you're so hot on dealing with terrorism, fighting terrorism, then go and bomb Turkey. You bunch of hypocrites. Oh, no, 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 it suits you. because Turkey is strategic to Russia. And you want Turkey, that's in Asia Minor, to be seen by us as being in Europe, and you want them in the EU. How can you have them in the EU if they're in Asia Minor? You can't. So the politicians change the rhetoric, don't they? They change the landscape of everything, and they change the nation. The political, if you like, setup. Land, anything you like. From Asia Minor to Europe. Now it's in Europe because we say so, say the politicians. They play fast and loose with us. Fast and loose. When they shipped all those weapons of mass destruction at the back of the New Forest, hiding it away from as many people as possible, and put them on those ships and marchward, and they sailed them out. That was deception. Doesn't matter what so-called evidence they can claim to come up with, even employing a young girl from a Saudi family to say there's bodies of children through incubators thrown on the floor by Saddam Hussein's soldiers. And we found that to be a lie. And then they's declared, oh, we didn't know that. Of course you knew that. Denial, 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 denial is the way of the politician. Yet you cannot deny the fact that weapons of mass destruction were secretly shipped at the back of the New Forest. We could peg and hear them. The Chinook helicopters coming over at the back end. You couldn't see what they'd got underneath, but you could hear them. They'd come through the right back end of it. And of course it's all guarded. MOD sectioned it all off so you couldn't get to the back of it even if you wanted to. You should have seen the pigging roadblocks. Diversions. And that was like 2-3 miles before you got to the area where they were shipping them. It was absolutely horrendous, absolutely horrendous, and they were doing it at night, from evening to the morning. I wouldn't do it in the day. They did it through the night, as we say, evening to the morning, when there was less people about. But these things, you could hear them, one after another after another. Make an horrendous sound. But of course all this will never be mentioned. This is a fiend who will one day, like Thatcher, they'll wake up and they will be absolutely tormented with what they've done. They believe in their heart of hearts that they have got away with it. This guy here has fudged and fudged and fudged and believes he can get away. But you know, we know, because we live in the real world, that things come around. Given enough time, they come around. And I tell you something, the sting of the coarse scorpion, as we say, will sting them very badly. Very badly. I wouldn't be surprised if this fella here isn't on tranquilizers. Some sort of medication to keep himself together. But that won't last. Thatcher found that when she perished in that hotel room all alone. What was all the wealth? What was all the fame? What was all the lying? What was all the deceit? What was all the attacking of the British public who paid her wages? What was that all for? Nothing. You see, your sins will catch you out. They will catch you out. And they'll rise up in your face, Mr. Blair. This fellow will get up one day and it'll be as though the world has risen up in his face, and it will be virtually the loony bin for him. Oh yeah, he gets away with it now. But believe me, the life always repays persons like this. This is why we stand for the truth. You'll never be hurt by the truth, but you will be hurt by lies and deceit and deception. It's just like all these crisis actors. One day, the whole thing will rise up in their faces. And then they won't be smiling. Then they won't be laughing. Then they won't be saying, oh, I've got this much in the bank, I've got that much in the bank, I'm all right, Jack. It won't be like that anymore. But we that hold to the truth, we can sleep content at night, knowing that we shall not wake up one day with an horrendous amount of guilt rising up and smacking us in the face. This guy, as we say, he's made up